It was a quiet, chilly night in the heart of the city, where the streets seemed almost deserted. The faint hum of distant traffic echoed through the air, blending with the occasional flicker of streetlights that painted the sidewalks in a soft, golden glow. Officer Daniel Carter, a seasoned policeman with over 15 years on the force, was finishing his late-night patrol. For Daniel, the city at night was a mixture of calm and chaos, a place where silence could turn to turmoil in a heartbeat. But tonight felt different. There was an unusual stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. As Daniel drove through the dimly lit streets, his eyes instinctively scanned the surroundings. He knew this route well. It was a quieter part of town, lined with small businesses and modest homes. But near the old bus stop, something caught his attention, a lone figure hunched on the wooden bench. Daniel slowed his cruiser, his headlights casting a beam onto the scene. At first, he thought it might be a vagrant or someone waiting for a late bus, but something didn't feel right. Curiosity pulled him closer. Parking a short distance away, Daniel stepped out of his car, his boots crunching softly against the pavement. The air was cold, and a light mist began to form, adding an almost eerie stillness to the moment. As he approached the bench, he could make out the small, slumped figure of a boy, no older than 10 or 11, bundled in a worn jacket that was far too thin for the biting night air. The boy's head was tucked down, his knees pulled close to his chest, as if trying to shield himself from the cold. Daniel's heart tightened. It wasn't unusual to see people down on their luck, but a child? Out here, alone at this hour? He gently called out, "Hey there, buddy, you okay?" His voice was calm and steady, the kind of tone he used to soothe people in distress. The boy stirred slightly but didn't look up. Daniel could see now that he was trembling, not just from the cold, but perhaps from fear or exhaustion. Kneeling beside him, Daniel softened his voice further. "Hey, it's all right. I'm Officer Carter. Are you lost? Do you need help?" Slowly, the boy lifted his head, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The child's face, illuminated by the nearby streetlight, was streaked with tears. His eyes, wide and glistening, spoke volumes of pain and exhaustion. It was the kind of look Daniel had seen before, the look of someone who had been through more than anyone, let alone a child, should ever endure. The boy didn't speak right away. He clutched his jacket tightly, as if it were the only thing holding him together. Daniel noticed the frayed edges of the fabric, the dirt on the boy's hands, and the way his shoes looked several sizes too big. This wasn't just a child out for a late-night adventure. This was a child who had been through something unimaginable. Taking a step back to give the boy space, Daniel radioed in to let dispatch know his location. "I've got a young boy here at the bus stop on Maple and 5th, he said, keeping his voice low so as not to alarm the child. "He looks cold and scared. I'm going to see if I can figure out what's going on." Turning back to the boy, Daniel crouched down again. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, his lips trembling as he tried to form words. "Liam," he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "All right, Liam," Daniel said, offering a reassuring smile. "Can you tell me what you're doing out here? Is there someone I can call for you? Your parents, maybe?" At the mention of parents, Liam's face crumpled, and a fresh wave of tears spilled down his cheeks. He buried his face in his hands, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. Daniel felt a pang of helplessness. Whatever this boy had been through, it was clear that he didn't feel safe, or perhaps he didn't have anyone to turn to. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of tissues. Handing one to Liam, he said softly, "It's okay. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I'm here to help. You're not alone anymore." For a moment, Liam seemed to relax slightly. He took the tissue with trembling hands and wiped his face. Daniel stayed by his side, giving him time to collect himself. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken pain and unanswered questions. Finally, Liam looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. I didn't want to be at home anymore." The weight of those words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He knew there was more to this story, something deeper and more heartbreaking than Liam was ready to share. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just a random encounter. This was a child in desperate need of help, and Daniel was determined to find out why. As the cold night stretched on, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He didn't know Liam's full story yet, but he would do everything in his power to make sure this boy found the safety and support he deserved. Little did he know, the truth Liam was about to reveal would shake him to his core and change both their lives forever. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. Liam's quiet confession lingered in the air, each word heavy with pain. "I didn't want to be at home anymore." Daniel didn't press him further. Had learned from years on the job that forcing someone to talk before they were ready could do more harm than good. Instead, he focused on making Liam feel safe. "Liam, let's get you out of this cold, all right," Daniel said, keeping his tone gentle. He gestured toward his police car parked nearby. "You don't have to say anything right now, but it's warmer in the car. We can figure things out together. Does that sound okay?" Liam hesitated, his small hands clutching the edge of the bench. He glanced at the cruiser, then back at Daniel. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but also a hint of trust beginning to form. Slowly, he nodded. Daniel extended a hand, not to pull him up, but to show he was there if Liam needed the support. The boy didn't take it, but he stood up on shaky legs, clutching his oversized jacket tightly around him. As they walked toward the car, Daniel noticed how Liam's shoes, far too big for his feet, slapped awkwardly against the pavement with each step. Opening the passenger door, Daniel guided Liam inside and quickly turned on the heater. The warmth filled the car, a stark contrast to the chilly night outside. Liam sank into the seat, his small frame dwarfed by the bulky uniform of the car's interior. He stared out the window, silent but visibly more at ease. Daniel sat in the driver's seat, giving the boy a moment to settle. "You hungry?" he asked after a pause. Liam shrugged, his gaze still fixed on the streetlight outside. Daniel decided to try anyway, reaching for the granola bar he kept in the center console for long shifts. He unwrapped it and placed it on the seat between them. "If you change your mind, it's right here." Liam didn't move at first, but as the minutes passed, he cautiously reached for the bar, nibbling on it quietly. Daniel watched him out of the corner of his eye, his mind racing with questions. Who was this boy? What had driven him out into the cold night alone? And why did the mention of home seem to cause him so much pain? The radio crackled, breaking the silence. "Unit 32, status check," came the dispatcher's voice. Daniel reached for the mic, keeping his tone steady. 32, I've got a young boy with me. Appears to be alone and in distress. We're at Maple and 5th. I'll keep you updated." The response was quick. "Copy that, 32. Do you need assistance?" Daniel glanced at Liam, who was still nibbling on the granola bar, his eyes distant. He shook his head, even though the dispatcher couldn't see him. "Negative for now. I'll handle it." The radio fell silent again, and Daniel turned his attention back to Liam. "You're doing great, kid," he said softly. "Take your time." Liam didn't respond, but his shoulders seemed to relax a little. The warmth of the car and the simple act of eating seemed to give him a small measure of comfort. Daniel leaned back in his seat, giving the boy space while his mind churned through possibilities. He'd dealt with runaways before, but there was something different about Liam. He wasn't angry or defiant. He didn't have the bravado some kids used to mask their fear. He was just sad, and that sadness ran deep. After a long stretch of silence, Liam finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go." Daniel turned his head slightly, careful not to make Liam feel pressured. "That's okay," he said gently. "Sometimes finding a safe place is the hardest part. You did the right thing coming here." Liam's fingers fidgeted with the edge of his jacket. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, he murmured. You're not causing trouble, Daniel assured him. I'm here to help. That's my job. Liam looked up at him for the first time, his eyes searching Daniel's face as if trying to gauge whether he could really be trusted. There was a flicker of something, hope maybe, but it was quickly buried under the weight of whatever he was carrying. You can't help, he said quietly, looking back down at his hands. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to tell Liam he could fix everything, that whatever was wrong, they could make it right. But he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he said, maybe not, but I can try. And trying is better than doing nothing, don't you think? Liam didn't answer, but Daniel thought he saw the boy's shoulders relax just a little more. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The minutes ticked by, the quiet hum of the heater filling the space. Daniel decided to take a different approach. You know, he said, his tone conversational, when I was your age, I used to hate the cold. My mom would always bundle me up in this big, ugly scarf, and I'd complain the whole time. But she didn't care. She'd say, better to look silly than to freeze. He chuckled softly, hoping to lighten the mood. Liam's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, as if he wanted to smile but didn't quite know how. Daniel took it as a small victory. I don't know where my mom is, Liam said suddenly, his voice breaking the fragile silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. Daniel's chest tightened, but he kept his expression calm. Is she far away? He asked gently. Liam shrugged, his eyes glassy. She left a long time ago. It's just me and... He trailed off, his voice faltering. Daniel didn't push. Instead, he nodded slowly, giving Liam the space to continue if he wanted to. But the boy fell silent again, retreating into himself. Outside, the mist had thickened, blurring the streetlights into soft halos of light. The city seemed quieter than ever, as if the world was holding its breath. Daniel's heart ached for the boy sitting beside him. Whatever Liam had been through, it was clear that he'd been carrying the weight of it alone for far too long. We'll figure this out, Liam, Daniel said softly, his voice steady and sure. You're not alone anymore. Liam didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. For now, that was enough. Daniel sat quietly for a moment, letting Liam's words sink in. The boy's admission about his mother and the weight in his voice stayed with him. There was so much pain in such a small frame, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Liam had been carrying it all on his own for far too long. He glanced at the boy, who was staring at his hands, his small fingers picking at the frayed edges of his jacket. Daniel knew he needed to tread carefully. Whatever had brought Liam to this point wasn't something he could unpack in one night. Liam, Daniel began gently, I don't want to push you, but if there's something you want to tell me, I'm here to listen. Sometimes just talking can help a little. He paused, watching for any reaction. But if you don't feel ready, that's okay too. You don't have to go through this alone. For a moment, Liam stayed quiet, his gaze fixed downward. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, he said, It's not just my mom. His words carried a weight that made Daniel sit up a little straighter. The boy looked up briefly, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and uncertainty. It's everything. Daniel nodded, his expression calm and steady. Sometimes, everything can feel like too much, can't it? He said, hoping to encourage Liam to continue. Liam hesitated, then nodded. At home it's bad. My dad, his voice cracked, and he stopped, gripping the edge of his jacket so tightly his knuckles turned white. Daniel's heart sank. He had a feeling he knew where this was going, but hearing it from Liam made it all the more devastating. It's okay, he said softly. You don't have to say it if it's too hard. I just want to make sure you're safe. Liam's breathing quickened, and Daniel could see the boy trying to hold back tears. He gets mad a lot, Liam finally said, his voice trembling. Sometimes he hits me, and when he's not mad, he just doesn't care. He acts like I'm not even there. Daniel felt a deep ache in his chest. He had dealt with cases like this before, but it never got easier. Hearing it directly from a child, seeing the pain in their eyes, always hit him hard. He leaned forward slightly, making sure his tone stayed calm and reassuring. "Liam, I'm so sorry you've had to go through that," he said. "You didn't deserve any of it. No one does." Liam wiped his face with his sleeve, sniffling quietly. "I tried to be good," he said, his voice barely audible. "I thought if I was good, he wouldn't be so mad. But it never worked. He just kept getting worse." Daniel clenched his jaw, trying to keep his emotions in check. He wanted to tell Liam that none of this was his fault, that no child should ever feel responsible for the actions of an adult. But he knew words weren't enough. Liam needed more than reassurances, he needed action. "Liam, thank you for telling me that," Daniel said gently. "It's really brave of you to talk about it. I know it's not easy." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I want to help you, but to do that, I need to make sure you're safe. Do you have anywhere else to go? Maybe a relative or a friend's house?" Liam shook his head. "No one," he said simply. "It's just me." Daniel's stomach tightened. He had hoped there might be someone else in Liam's life who could step in, but it seemed the boy truly felt alone. The thought of Liam enduring this kind of pain without any support was almost too much to bear. Before Daniel could say more, Liam spoke again, his voice laced with fear. "You're not going to take me back, are you? To him?" He looked at Daniel with wide, pleading eyes. Daniel shook his head firmly. "No, Liam, I'm not taking you back there. I promise. My job is to keep you safe, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you are." Liam seemed to relax slightly, but the fear in his eyes didn't completely fade. Daniel knew that trust wouldn't come easily for a boy who had been let down so many times before. Still, he was determined to earn it. The silence in the car grew heavy again, and Daniel's mind raced with next steps. He needed to get Liam somewhere safe, somewhere he could start to heal. But he also knew this wasn't just about finding a temporary solution. Liam deserved stability, care, and a future free from fear. As Daniel sat there, weighing his options, the radio crackled again. "Unit 32, do you need assistance with that young boy?" the dispatcher asked. Daniel picked up the mic, glancing at Liam before responding. "Not yet," he said, "but I'll need to arrange a place for him to stay tonight. I'll check in shortly." "Copy that, 32, the dispatcher replied. Daniel set the mic down and turned to Liam. "How about we head to the station for a little while?" he suggested. "It's warm there, and we can figure out what to do next. There's a room where you can rest, and I'll stay with you the whole time. Does that sound okay?" Liam hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said quietly. As Daniel started the car, he glanced at Liam again. The boy was still nervous, his fingers fidgeting with his jacket, but there was a faint glimmer of trust in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As they drove through the misty streets, Daniel's mind kept circling back to Liam's story. He couldn't shake the image of the boy sitting alone at that bus stop, cold and scared, with nowhere else to turn. He thought about his own childhood, how his parents had always been there for him, even when times were tough. He couldn't imagine what it must feel like to grow up without that kind of love and support. He glanced at Liam again, the boy's small frame illuminated by the glow of the dashboard lights. Daniel made a silent vow to himself. He would do everything in his power to make sure Liam never had to feel alone or afraid again. But as the station came into view, Daniel couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. He knew this was just the beginning of Liam's journey, and of his own. There were still so many unanswered questions, so much pain to uncover and heal. And as much as he wanted to shield Liam from it all, Daniel knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. For now, though, he focused on the immediate task, getting Liam to a safe place, where he could finally begin to feel like a kid again. Whatever it took, Daniel was ready to fight for him. As they arrived at the station, the streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot. The station was quieter than usual, with only a few officers still lingering near their desks, finishing reports or prepping for the night shift. Daniel parked the cruiser and turned to Liam, who was nervously fiddling with his jacket zipper. The boy's wide eyes scanned the building, uncertainty etched into every line of his face. "It's all right," Daniel said softly, trying to reassure him. "We'll just sit in one of the side rooms. It's quiet, and no one will bother us. I'll stay with you the whole time." Liam hesitated but nodded, his small hand clutching the granola bar wrapper he hadn't quite finished. Daniel got out first, walking around to open Liam's door. The boy slid out reluctantly, his steps hesitant as they walked toward the entrance. The cold night air nipped at their backs, but Daniel could feel the warmth of the station waiting just ahead. Inside, Daniel guided Liam through the station, avoiding the more bustling areas. He caught a few curious glances from his colleagues, but gave them a subtle shake of his head, signaling not to ask questions. He didn't want Liam to feel overwhelmed or like he was on display. For now, it was just about making the boy feel safe. They reached a small break room tucked away near the back of the station. Daniel flicked on the light, revealing a cozy space with a couch, a small table, and a kitchenette. "Here we are," he said, gesturing toward the couch. "You can sit here. I'll grab us some water, okay?" Liam perched on the edge of the couch, his posture stiff, as if he was ready to bolt at any moment. Daniel moved slowly, not wanting to startle him, and filled 2 cups of water from the cooler. He handed one to Liam, who accepted it with a quiet thanks before taking a small sip. The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Daniel sat in a chair across from Liam, giving him space but keeping his presence steady. He wanted the boy to feel like he could open up without pressure. "Liam," Daniel began after a moment, "I need to ask you a few things, just so I can help you the best way I can. Is that all right?" Liam looked up, his expression wary, but not entirely closed off. "Okay," he said softly. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice calm and even. "When you said your dad gets mad, does anyone else know about that? Maybe a teacher, a neighbor, or someone else who might have noticed?" Liam shook his head. "No one," he said quietly. "I didn't tell anyone. I was scared." Daniel nodded, his heart sinking. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was still hard. "That's okay," he said gently. "It's really brave of you to tell me. And now that you have, I can make sure you don't have to go back there." For the first time, Liam looked directly at him, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear in his eyes. "You mean it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't have to go back." "I promise," Daniel said firmly. "We're going to figure this out together. But to do that, I'll need to let someone else know what's going on. There are people who can help, people who can make sure you're safe." Liam's face fell slightly, the flicker of hope dimming. "What if they don't believe me?" he asked. "What if they say I'm lying?" Daniel shook his head. "I believe you, Liam, and I'll make sure they do too. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Liam's grip on the cup tightened, and he nodded, though the uncertainty in his eyes didn't completely fade. Daniel could tell the boy had been let down too many times before to fully trust anyone yet. But he was willing to try, and that was enough for now. As Daniel considered his next steps, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from one of the social workers he had contacted earlier. They were on their way to the station to meet Liam and discuss his situation. Relief washed over Daniel, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. There were still so many unknowns, so many pieces of Liam's story that hadn't been uncovered yet. Liam's voice broke the silence. "What happens now?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and fear. Daniel set his phone down and leaned forward, meeting the boy's gaze. "First, we're going to get you somewhere safe. There's a place called a shelter where kids like you can stay when they don't have anywhere else to go. It's warm as food, and there are people who can help you." Liam frowned. "A shelter?" he asked. "Will there be other kids there?" Daniel nodded, Yes, but it's not like a big, crowded place. It's more like a house with rooms where you can have your own space. And the people there are really nice. They'll make sure you're comfortable. Liam didn't look entirely convinced, but he didn't argue either. Daniel could see the wheels turning in his mind, the boy trying to process everything that was happening. He wanted to reassure him further, but before he could say more, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stood, motioning for Liam to stay seated. He opened the door to find the social worker standing there, a kind-looking woman with a warm smile. She introduced herself quietly, her tone gentle and professional. Daniel stepped aside to let her in, glancing back at Liam to make sure he was okay. "This is Miss Carter," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm. "She's here to help us figure out what to do next." As Miss Carter began to talk to Liam, asking gentle questions about his situation, Daniel felt a mix of emotions. He was relieved that help had arrived, but the weight of Liam's story still sat heavily on his shoulders. The boy had been through so much, and there was still so much more to uncover. Daniel knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to see it through. For now, he focused on being a steady presence for Liam, a source of stability in a world that had been anything but. As the conversation between Liam and Miss Carter continued, Daniel stayed close, ready for whatever came next. Miss Carter's questions were gentle yet thorough. She had a calming presence that seemed to put Liam slightly at ease, though his answers remained brief and cautious. Daniel stayed close, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, but his posture relaxed to signal he was there for support. He watched as Liam glanced at him every so often, as if making sure he hadn't disappeared. Each time, Daniel met his gaze with a reassuring nod. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear just how complex Liam's situation was. It wasn't only about his father's anger or neglect. There were deeper layers of fear and isolation. Liam mentioned moving frequently, each new place feeling less like a home than the last. He spoke of nights spent alone, while his father disappeared for hours, sometimes days. But there was something else, something unspoken, that seemed to weigh on the boy. Daniel could see it in the way he hesitated before answering certain questions, in the way his eyes darted nervously to the floor. "Liam," Miss Carter said softly, her voice breaking through the quiet. "You're doing so well, and I want you to know you're safe here. But I need to ask, is there anything else you're worried about? Something that maybe you haven't told us yet?" Liam's grip on his cup tightened, and he stared down at it as though the answer might be written there. The room felt heavier, the silence stretching long enough for Daniel to exchange a concerned glance with Miss Carter. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice so low they had to lean in to hear him. "There's someone else," he murmured. Daniel straightened, his heart skipping a beat. "Someone else?" he asked gently. "What do you mean, Liam?" Liam's hands fidgeted nervously, and he kept his eyes fixed on the cup in his lap. "My sister," he said, barely above a whisper. "She's still there, at home." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He glanced at Miss Carter, whose calm demeanor faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "You have a sister?" she asked gently. "How old is she?" 5, Liam said, his voice trembling. "Her name is Emma." Daniel felt a wave of urgency wash over him. He hadn't known Liam had a sibling, let alone one so young. The idea of Emma being left behind in the same environment Liam had just described was almost too much to bear. He could see the conflict in Miss Carter's eyes as well, her professional composure straining under the weight of this new information. "Liam," Daniel said carefully, crouching down to meet the boy's eye level. "Is Emma okay? Is she safe right now?" Liam hesitated, his lower lip trembling. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Sometimes he yells at her too. I tried to keep her safe, but I couldn't always." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "It's not your fault, Liam," he said firmly. "You did the best you could, and now we're going to make sure she's safe too. I promise." Miss Carter nodded, her voice calm but urgent. "Liam, Thank you for telling us about Emma. That was very brave. We're going to make sure she's okay, but we need your help. Can you tell us anything else about her? Is she at home right now? Liam nodded slowly. She should be. She doesn't go to school yet, and my dad, he doesn't let her go outside much. Daniel felt his jaw clench, his mind racing through the possibilities. Time was critical now. If Emma was still at the house, they needed to act fast. But they also had to be careful. If Liam's father was there, things could escalate quickly. Miss Carter, Daniel said, straightening up, we need to call this in. Now. She nodded, already reaching for her phone. Daniel turned back to Liam, his tone gentle but firm. Liam, we're going to go get Emma, okay? You don't have to worry about her anymore. We'll make sure she's safe. Liam's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, his trust in Daniel evident, despite the fear still etched on his face. Daniel gave him a reassuring smile before stepping out of the room to make the necessary calls. As the plan unfolded, the tension in the station grew. Officers were briefed, a team was assembled, and every precaution was taken to ensure Emma's safety. Daniel stayed close to Liam, who was now sitting quietly on the couch, his small hands gripping the edges of the cushion. The boy's bravery was astounding, but Daniel could see the toll it was taking on him. He wanted to reassure Liam, to tell him that everything would be okay, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Finally, the call came through. The team was ready, and Daniel was going with them. He crouched down in front of Liam one last time. Liam, I'm going to help get Emma, okay? Miss Carter will stay here with you. You're not alone. Liam nodded, his eyes wide with worry. Will she be scared? He asked, his voice small. Daniel's heart ached at the question, but he forced a steady smile. She might be, but she'll be okay. We'll bring her back to you. I promise. As Daniel left the room, the weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. The stakes had never felt higher, and he knew there was no room for error. Somewhere out there, a little girl was waiting, scared and vulnerable, and Daniel was determined to bring her to safety, no matter what it took. The drive to Liam's house felt impossibly long, the tension in the cruiser thick enough to cut. Daniel's mind raced with questions and fears. Was Emma okay? Was Liam's father at home? What would they walk into when they arrived? The sirens were off, their approach deliberately quiet to avoid alarming anyone inside. Daniel gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white, and exchanged brief but purposeful glances with the officer riding beside him. The team was ready, but there was no denying the risk involved. As they pulled onto the dimly lit street, the house came into view. It was small and unkempt, the windows dark except for a faint glow leaking out from one on the ground floor. Daniel parked the cruiser a little way down the block, and the team moved into position. Every step felt deliberate, the sound of their boots muffled by the grass. Daniel's heart pounded as he approached the front door, his breath shallow but steady. He glanced at the officer beside him, who gave a silent nod. Then, with a quick motion, they knocked, loud and firm, but not overly aggressive. For a moment, there was no response. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, until finally they heard movement from inside. Footsteps shuffled closer, and then the door creaked open just a crack. A man stood there, his disheveled appearance and bloodshot eyes telling a story of their own. Daniel immediately recognized him from Liam's description. He didn't wait for the man to speak. "Sir, we're here to check on the welfare of the children in this home," Daniel said firmly, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "We need to come inside." The man's expression darkened, his hand tightening on the edge of the door. "What kids?" he growled, his voice slurred slightly. "There's no kids here. You've got the wrong house." Daniel didn't flinch. "We have reason to believe there's a 5-year-old girl here named Emma," he said, his tone unwavering. "If you don't let us in, we'll have to proceed with a warrant. It's your choice." The man's eyes flickered with panic, and for a split second, Daniel thought he might slam the door shut. But then, a faint sound broke through the tension, a small voice, barely audible, calling out from somewhere inside. "Liam?" Daniel's pulse quickened, and before the man could react, the team moved in. The door swung open, and they pushed past him, spreading out through the house. Daniel's focus was razor-sharp as he followed the sound of the voice, his footsteps quick but careful. In the back room, he found her. Emma was curled up on a worn-out mattress, clutching a small stuffed animal to her chest. Her wide, frightened eyes locked onto Daniel as he entered, and she shrank back instinctively. She was tiny, even smaller than he'd imagined, and the sight of her in such a bleak environment made his chest tighten. "Emma," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "It's okay. I'm here to help. Liam sent me." At the mention of her brother's name, Emma's eyes softened, and she hesitated before nodding slightly. Daniel extended a hand to her, his voice steady and gentle. "Can you come with me? Liam's waiting for you. He's safe, and he wants to see you." Emma clutched the stuffed animal tighter, but slowly slid off the mattress, her small hand slipping into Daniel's. The weight of her trust in that moment was overwhelming, and he gave her a reassuring smile as he led her out of the room. Meanwhile, the rest of the team had detained the father, who was shouting protests and excuses, his anger barely masking his fear. Daniel didn't linger to listen. His focus was on getting Emma out of that house and back to her brother. As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them, and Emma's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. He bent down and scooped her up, her tiny frame fitting easily in his arms. "You're safe now," he whispered to her, his voice firm but kind. "I've got you." When they arrived back at the station, Liam was sitting in the same spot on the couch, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. The moment he saw Emma, his face lit up with a mixture of relief and emotion that words couldn't capture. He jumped to his feet, and Daniel gently set Emma down. She ran to her brother, throwing her arms around him as he knelt to hug her tightly. "You're okay," Liam murmured, his voice breaking. "I was so scared." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I missed you," she said softly. Daniel watched the reunion, a lump forming in his throat. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered emotion, and it reminded him why he did this job, even on the hardest days. Miss Carter stood nearby, her own expression touched with relief and warmth as she observed the siblings. But just as the tension began to ease, the unexpected twist came. One of the officers approached Daniel, his expression grave. "We've got an issue," he said quietly, pulling Daniel aside. "While searching the house, we found something troubling." Daniel's stomach sank as the officer continued, detailing the discovery of hidden documents and photos, suggesting that Liam and Emma's situation might be part of something much larger than just their father's neglect. There were indications of connections to individuals outside the home, people who might have known, or even been involved in, what was happening. The revelation hit Daniel like a second wave, the relief of rescuing Emma now clouded by a deeper, more complex threat. The siblings were safe for now, but it was clear that their story wasn't over. The case was only beginning to unfold, and the fight to protect them and uncover the full truth had just begun. Daniel stood in the hallway, absorbing the officer's words. The initial relief of getting Emma and Liam to safety had shifted into a deeper sense of responsibility. The discovery at the house suggested layers to this case that hadn't yet been uncovered. But for now, Daniel reminded himself, the priority was the children. They were safe, and that was what mattered most in this moment. Whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. When Daniel returned to the room where Liam and Emma were, the siblings were sitting side by side, Emma leaning into Liam's shoulder. Liam looked up at Daniel with cautious hope, the kind that broke Daniel's heart because of how rare it seemed for the boy. "Is it over?" Liam asked, his voice quiet but steady. Daniel crouched down to their level, his voice gentle but honest. "For now, you're safe. That's what matters. We're going to keep you both together, and we're going to make sure no one hurts you ever again." Emma clung to Liam, and Daniel could see her trust in her brother, her anchor through all of this. Liam nodded slowly, his small shoulders relaxing just a little. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Carter entered the room, holding a warm smile despite the weight of the situation. "We've arranged for you both to stay with the foster family for now," she explained. "They're kind people who have worked with children before, and they're excited to meet you. They'll take good care of you while we sort everything out." Liam looked hesitant but didn't protest. Daniel could see the wheels turning in the boy's mind. Always thinking, always protecting. "Can we stay together?" Liam asked, his voice firmer now. Miss Carter nodded. "Absolutely. That's a promise." As the arrangements were finalized, Daniel stayed with the siblings, keeping them company while they waited. He told them stories, simple ones about growing up and learning to be brave, steering clear of anything too heavy. Emma giggled softly at one of his anecdotes, her first real laugh of the night, and Liam even cracked a small smile. For a moment, the weight of their situation seemed to lift, replaced by the simple warmth of human connection. When the foster family arrived, they greeted Liam and Emma with gentle smiles and warm words. The woman knelt down to Emma's level, holding out her hand. "Hi, Emma," she said softly. "I'm Grace. This is my husband, Tom. We're so happy to meet you." Emma glanced at Liam, who nodded reassuringly, before taking Grace's hand. Tom placed a gentle hand on Liam's shoulder. "We're going to take good care of you both," he said. "You don't have to worry about anything." As the children left with their new guardians, Daniel felt a bittersweet pang. He was relieved they were going to a safe place, but he also felt a deep connection to them, one that wouldn't easily fade. Miss Carter placed a hand on his arm, her expression a mix of exhaustion and pride. "You did good, Daniel," she said. "They're going to be okay because of you." But Daniel couldn't shake the lingering questions about the documents found at the house. After ensuring the kids were safely on their way, he returned to the station to go over the evidence with the team. The photos and paperwork hinted at a network of individuals who might have been aware of, or complicit in, what Liam and Emma had endured. It was a chilling realization, but Daniel knew it was something they could unravel, piece by piece. For now, though, he focused on what he could do, protect the siblings and ensure their father faced justice. The next morning, Daniel visited Liam and Emma's foster home to check on them. He found them sitting in the backyard, Emma drawing on the pavement with chalk while Liam watched over her. They looked more at ease than they had the night before, though the shadows of their past hadn't fully disappeared. When Liam saw Daniel, he stood up, his face lighting up in a way that made Daniel's heart swell. "Hi," Liam said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Hi, buddy," Daniel replied, crouching down to meet him. "How are you both doing?" Liam glanced at Emma, who was engrossed in her drawing, before looking back at Daniel. "Better," he said simply. Daniel nodded, his own smile soft but genuine. "That's what I like to hear." Liam hesitated, then asked, "Are you going to keep helping other kids? Like you helped us?" The question caught Daniel off guard, but he answered without hesitation. "Always," he said. "That's my job. And I'll keep checking on you and Emma too. You're not alone anymore." Liam seemed to take comfort in that, and for the first time, he let his guard down completely, giving Daniel a hug. It was brief but heartfelt, and it spoke volumes about the trust they had built in such a short time. As Daniel drove away, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing he had made a real difference in Liam and Emma's lives. Their journey wasn't over, but they were on a path toward healing, surrounded by people who cared. And while the case still had threads to untangle, Daniel knew they had taken the first crucial steps in breaking the cycle of pain and neglect. Back at the station, Daniel sat at his desk, reviewing the notes and evidence with renewed determination. The discovery at the house had opened a new chapter in the investigation, one that could lead to uncovering a larger issue. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to reflect on the night's events, the lives that had been changed, and the resilience of two remarkable children. As the day came to a close, Daniel walked out into the fading sunlight, a sense of hope settling over him. The world could be dark and unforgiving, but it was also filled with moments of light, moments where courage, kindness, and connection could change everything. Liam and Emma's story was a reminder of that, and it was a story Daniel would carry with him always. The case might have started with heartbreak, but it ended with something much stronger: the promise of a brighter future.